All right, we're back. It is game 1014 in the winter 2017 semester at George Brown College, and we are week 2, part 1 of our broadcast. We're talking about game production, the second half of the book, right? And again, I'm going to share these things with you later on, game production 2. So again, we're talking about production, and again, this is all based on if your pre-production went well, your planning went well, everything is fantastic. You had a really good document, great experience with your concepts. Who had that? Everyone, all the production went well? Pre-production stuff?
Good marks.
Good marks, but how did it go, right? That's the whole thing. Having good marks and having it go well doesn't necessarily mean it's not a one-to-one relationship sometimes. And what I mean by that is, you know what, there's the real world and there's the classroom world. And in the classroom world, you might got great marks, but in the real world, maybe you don't like your team members, right? We're having that problem today. So pre-production is part of, there's a bit of politics involved, right? It's not always technical, the stuff that we do when we're in teams. The technical aspect of the team is probably, pretty exciting part. You're building something, you're going to deploy something, you're going to have something concrete to show at the end of the day. And that's the great thing about being a programmer, right? You're going to have something concrete to show. Right. In some situations, you might be in a job where there's nothing concrete to show after a good day's work. Right. And that's a problem. It kind of demoralizes people. Right. So one of the things we're talking about today is, and if you look at when we get to it, right, I like this idea. The production, is at the point where we start doing something with our game. It's after we've done all of our concept work, after we've agreed what's going to be on the game design document. What do our wireframes look like if you've done wireframes? You guys do wireframes for your any kind of for your levels or anything else? You should, and you should revise that document, that game document that you kind of put up. And last week I asked you guys to put it up. If you haven't had a chance to put it up, by the way, and if you weren't here last week and you haven't had a chance to submit Lab 1, which was due last week, please submit today. And also, I'm also going to give you a chance to resubmit Lab 1 today because of the pending changes to the team, right? So if you had a bunch of question marks on what everyone does last week, right? Please put that up together please put it back up today and say, or resubmit another option, say, here's what we all do now, right? We've changed. And it's okay to make, I've given you the ability to submit multiple times. Is that a question?
It's just like the team leader that submits it, not every individual team. Or do you want every team member?
No. If something's changed, right? And typically I only want one person to submit, right? Typically, right? Typically. However, there's a problem with this, right? What if you all assume that somebody, if I assume, I'm really sorry, James, I apologize, but let's suppose James, James is not on the same team and he goes, you're going to submit? Yeah, I guess so. And he says, he thinks I said, I'm going to submit, right? And I'm thinking he's going to submit. And then we kind of run into the situation where nobody submits. That's a problem, right? Because as an instructor, the only thing I can do is go, did they submit? No, 0, right? I don't want that situation. So sometimes I recommend at least the team leader at the bare minimum and a backup, okay? Maybe the technical lead or somebody else, a couple of submissions. And it's okay if I get the same ones because it should be the exact same. I should see your team, who the team members are. Every time you submit something to me, please indicate who your team is, what's your team name, all that kind of stuff, and all your team members, right? Now that shouldn't change, but do it every time. Nothing's gonna hurt. Then I can go through the list and go, okay, check. These guys are all here. They all, or girl, sorry, I can't just say all guys. And then everyone's getting a mark, right? But what if your name's not on this stuff? Like what if you're left out, look through the list and I see your name and no one's mentioned you? That's a real problem. So please don't do that. Please make sure that everyone's in your team is listed. Your team leader should be responsible for that kind of stuff and give a backup. Maybe you're a technical lead or somebody else, I don't know, a backup team leader, just in case your team leader gets sick or something. That person should also submit. We want to talk about the production cycle, and really there's a bunch of elements to the production cycle. One is the design side, then there's the art side and engineering, right? And then, of course, how do we put everything together and make everything work? So that's one part. That's like one chapter of the book, this whole part right here, right? So one thing, what's the difference, just a review, what's the difference between design and art? Sometimes, I hear design and I think art. Yeah.
Yeah, design is like actually the physical, or not physical, layout of like the levels and such and how all the systems are interacting.
Is there programming involved in design?
Yeah.
It could be, right? It could be, right? What else? What else could design entail?
I actually have a question.
Yeah.
Are these slides on Blackboard?
I'm gonna put them up in Blackboard later.
Okay.
I think design is more like how you're gonna like the plan of action, like how you're gonna make the game and stuff.
Well, hold on. You just said that. I'm sorry. What was your name?
John.
John?
Yeah.
John said that design was a little bit of programming. How can I do concept and programming at the same time? Is that possible? Right? I'm just asking. You guys are telling me different things here. I'm just reviewing the book from last semester, right? So, tell me. Go ahead. Keep going.
What I think is basically just plan, and you can write pseudocode if you want. It's basically how like the structuring and decision making was how it's going to be.
Okay, I like your thinking. Well, okay, so because I'm going to go back to programming. If designers program, then what do the engineers do? What's the difference between a designer and an engineer? What's the difference?
Engineer
Executes the plan, right? But a designer designs the plan, right? I like that thinking. And sometimes who does the mechanics? Is it the engineer? The game mechanics. If I kind of plan the game, is the engineer do the mechanics? Well, no, they execute. They make sure that the mechanics are working the way they should, but the designers are really involved in the mechanics, yeah? Right? What about the art people? Are they involved in the mechanics? Kind of. No, but kind of, because they kind of have to think, well, what about special effects relating to the mechanics? So I have to put create an asset that are relating to a piece of mechanic. Like example, if I have a guy in a 3D game, and I know you guys are doing 2D games, if I have a guy in the 3D game playing first-person shooter and I shoot a gun, am I going to have a bullet flash? What is it going to look like, a muzzle flash, right? Is it going to be, is it a space gun? Is it some kind of, slug thrower? What kind of gun am I using, and what kind of flash is it going to make, and what kind of special effect, what kind of sound effect is it going to make when it hits the wall, right? What about if I hit a brick wall or a wooden wall or hit the ground or hit water? Is it going to be different sound effects for that? And that's all part of the art side, right? I got to collect all those assets, and then the engineer has to make it all happen, right? All those things have to happen. But the designer is going to decide that these things, we want these things, these features in our game, yeah? So everyone has a role, plus the producer. The producer is probably central to the whole thing, right? And maybe in some sense, I want to say that the leaders in this team here are producers, right? Because you're in charge of this project in some sense. And I don't want to put it, it's not really like that here in the class, because everyone should be kind of doing some kind of technical work here. This is not a production college where we just do, production work. We don't do any kind of technical work at all. And this is not an art college, not this part anyway, per se, in that all we do is do assets. We're not going to just do things with Maya or Blender or 3D Studio Max, and that's all we do, right? We don't do that stuff. We actually, produce something program-wise, right? So again, there's going to be a mix between, there's different cycles, and we have to talk about how the whole production cycle works together, because it's not just around one team. And everyone has kind of, each of these design or these departments have a team lead. And typically the team lead, and this is review for some of you, right? The team lead connects or talks to the producer, right? The producer is like a super project manager, if you will. Not only does he worry about the project, he worries about the funding, he worries about talking to upper management, or she. I have to say she too. It's not fair to say the producer's a he all the time, right? And that's their role. It's a very challenging role, right? Because sometimes they make go, no go decisions, right? Sometimes they prevent things like feature creep, which we're going to talk about today, right? And all those kind of things. They make some decisions, but a lot of things are made alongside with the team leads, the art team lead, the lead designer, the lead artist, the lead engineer. All those things kind of come together. I want you to think about those things, because there's not a lot of people on your team. You might have what? Who's got okay, I'm going to put my hand up now. Who's going to have at the end of today 10 members on their team? Okay, that's a freaking big team, man. For a 2D game, that's massive, right? That's insane. What is everyone gonna do, right?
Supervise.
Yeah. I don't need 10 supervisors, you know what I'm saying? I'm not gonna get anything done, right? Actually, I find bigger teams, especially with a small project, are less productive a lot of times than smaller teams, small, tight little teams that everyone has a role and everything like that, right? And I know you were asked to put together at least 7, right? Something like that. It's kind of a 6 to 7 people in a team or something like that, right? And that's fine. But everyone should have a role. And I want you to think about this idea of lead designer. Who's your lead designer? Even though you have a producer, which is the team leader, who's your lead designer? The person who's in charge of game mechanics, who may have thought about doing some prototyping, right? Like, how does the game is going to work? That kind of stuff, right? Who is your lead art producer, right? Who is that person, right? And that means the person who's going to get assets and that kind of stuff, and also test the assets to make sure that they're right. And we can do that with code, all right? Like testing assets separately in little experiments, right? That have nothing to do with the main game, to make sure that the assets are right, they're sized correctly, all that kind of stuff. I'm talking real technical stuff, right? A technical artist, if you will. Please don't tell me in this class I'm not an artist, because that's not going to fly with me. Everybody here should be a technical artist. They should understand things like how to put things together. And if you don't have that experience, I'm going to try and get you there slowly, right? Is there any kind of technical art course that you're going to take in this college? Do you know? How about Photoshop? You going to learn Photoshop at all? How about, how about Maya? You going to learn Maya at all to create some kind of mesh or 3D? But you're going to do some, right? Guys and girls, right? Everyone here should know a little bit about all that stuff. It doesn't mean that you have to be a professional Maya artist, a three-dimensional modeler, or some kind of level designer. It's not about that. It's about understanding the tools and appreciating the other person's job, right? So if you don't know Photoshop, I think it behooves you as a game person to go out there and do a little bit of Photoshop, right? You'll understand how to use some kind of tool. There's also some free tools. If you don't like Photoshop, you can't afford Photoshop, or you don't have access to Photoshop, you can also learn Krita, K-R-I-T-A. We're going to talk about that as a link. There's also other tools you can learn out there that are free, right? Like GIMP. That's another open source tool you can access. It does graphic manipulation, right? Those kind of things, but you should understand those things. So the lead artist is not always, and in this case, we might have other parts of lead art production, but also things like sound. Who's going to be your sound engineer, right? If you have a big team, 10 people, give somebody to do sound and test those sounds technically. Like you actually go up on, inside of a, create a little project for you to test those sounds out. Do they work properly? Do they trigger at the right time? Do I have to cut them short? How do I do those things? And then you can add those, sounds, background sounds, feedback sounds from, your collisions or anything like that happening. Soundtrack, if you're going to create a soundtrack or anything like that, or get it from, some free online resource, which there are a lot of. Someone's going to be in charge of that, because if you're not in charge of that, it's not going to happen, right? And then from an engineering perspective, everyone here should be some kind of technical engineer, but there might be a tech lead, and I recommend that. Someone should be tech lead, a senior person who knows more about programming than the others, because everyone's going to have strengths and weaknesses, and they should kind of follow the lead of that technical engineer, that person who is the strongest in that. Going back to that, though, here's what I want you to try not to do. Please don't pile all these leads on one person, okay? So for one person is like the technical lead, the art director, the designer, the producer. That person's like a maverick, right? You can't have a maverick in your team. This is not that exercise. This exercise that we're doing together in game production is not a one man or one woman show. It's not like that. This is not that exercise. You might be able to produce something out of class on your own, right? But here we work together as a team, and everyone has to be kind of a vital member of the team. And if you've got a big team and you don't have enough roles for those people, you got to rethink today whether you need everybody, right? Because there might be some people that don't have enough people on their team, right? Who's got a team of 4 or less? Anybody? Yeah, see? There's a person out there that's got 4 or less members on their team. That's an opportunity to combine and make that team a little stronger, because there's at least 4 jobs that I can see here, right? Design, art, engineering, and producer, right? Some kind of tech lead or team lead, right? At least 4 people. So that's crazy to have that many, and then, a bunch of jobs and not enough people. How about in the 6 or 7 range? Anyone have 6 or 7 members on their team? 1, 8 or 9, maybe 8 or 9. It's a lot of people. Make sure everyone has a job. By today, everyone has to have a job. Think about what their role is going to be in the coming weeks. Right?
A lot of us have a rough copy version of that already.
Rough copy. So you're saying, I like that. I like the fact that everyone has a rough copy version. Today, I want you to solidify that. Yep. All right? That's what I want you to do. That's one of the exercises we're going to take away after this one. All right? All right. So, again, even though we've done all kinds of pre-production, it doesn't mean that we're not going to change the plan. Okay? That's what this slide is kind of really saying. We have to be a little bit more flexible, right? And sometimes we may have to add features and so on, but we need to do that with a specific process, okay? So we can't just add additional features just off the cuff, right? We're going to talk about that. But one of the things that we want to always do, right, is we want to make sure that we can, especially from a producer perspective, you got to be able to track things like how the plan is working compared to actual production. Okay, so plan versus actual. And that means you got to have a plan. Who has a plan? And I'm looking at the team leads right now. Who has a solid plan of what they're doing over the next, and we're at week 2, right? 12 weeks. Do you guys have a 12-week plan? If you don't have a 12-week plan, that's something you need to bang out first before any kind of programming goes on. I'm talking about a solid thing, what you're going to be doing every single week you're together, right? I go back to that old adage, which is if you don't schedule it, it's not going to get done. It's not going to get done. We have busy lives. We have other courses. We have other things to do outside of this course. So one of the things I'd like you to try and do today is sit together and decide on the plan of attack. Who's going to do what, and what are the deliverables, right? So be part of your project or whatever. That's why I'm telling you, you may have to expand that document of yours, right, that you submitted to me last week, right? And talk about what's your project. What does your plan look like over the next 12 weeks? How are you going to be able to deliver by presentation date? How are you going to talk about those other key moments in time as we move forward and kind of do these checkpoints with me over the next little while? How are you going to do that? It's not going to happen by accident. It's going to happen by design, which means you guys are going to get together in your team and you're going to say, here's what everyone's doing, and this is when we have a deliverable, and what are we going to pump out this week? What are you planning on doing this week? Does anyone have an idea of what they want to come out with this week? Yes.
Yeah, we're doing level elements this week.
Level elements.
Yeah, we
Okay.
already have a running game.
Because you have a prototype, you have stuff going on. So, is there anyone else to that at that point that you can do level elements? Okay, so kind of, sort of, yes, maybe, right? Maybe up down there. So that, again, that's pretty good. But I want you to map it out, right? So I want you to kind of come up with a schedule, just like I have an outline for the course, right? I want you to sit there and go like, today we're at week 2. What are we doing today? Today might be organization day or whatever, right? Or some other things that you're going to put into play. What's next week? What's the following week? Come up with a plan. I want that plan today, right? And it's going to be in a separate upload from you guys. I know this is another thing I'm getting you to do. Oh God, right? I know it's a lot of work, but put together a little spreadsheet, right? Or something. It could be a spreadsheet. It could be just a Word document or some kind of document, right? Where you put the week and what you're doing every single week. Okay, try and match it up with the outline, right? So take a look online. I've got on Blackboard, you got the outline for the course. Sit there and try and match up what you're doing that week with your teams. That's an exercise on itself. And it's also an opportunity. We're going to do that for a maximum of 50 minutes, 50 today, right? You and your team reorganizing, who's doing what, uploading, updating Lab 1 that we did last week, and uploading the plan, your game plan for Lab 2. That's what I want today. Again, Lab 1 and Lab 2, each worth 1% of your final grade, right? So this is going to come off things like your exam. So the more of these little labs you do, the less, important your exam is going to be, which is cool, right? Because exams can be a killer, right? And want to try and reduce the midterm exam as much as possible. So it's just concepts. If I can get it down to a nice 10%, that would be nice, right? So it's not going to kill you, right? It's going to be something supplementary that you have to know, right? The most important thing for me is, can you get all these things done to organize yourself? Because this is game production, right? It's not just a theory course. I want you to produce something. I want to see your stuff today, or this semester, right? All right. So sometimes, the plan changes. And I think a point here that I like to point out is point 2, which is it's kind of optimistic to say that when you start off your plan, which is last year sometime, right? The last semester, you start off a plan and there's not going to be any changes between then and now, or then and, when we're done in April at some point, right? That's crazy. Even in a real life game, in a AAA game scenario, you're going to have stuff changing. And I've got a point here that says, well, what if you plan something in January 2017? You start off today planning, and then you deliver by sometime in June 2018, and there's not going to be any changes in 18 months. Like everything's going to be static, right? Guys and girls, there is nothing like that in the real world in a project, right? Your project has changes. Your project will fail. Your project will have to be reinvented. There's going to be stuff that has to happen. Team members will leave. Team members will resign for whatever reason. They'll be fired in the real world. Some things don't work or whatever. They'll move from one team to the other because of resource issues. There's all kinds of things that can happen to, kind of put a wrench in the gears, right, for you guys. But the plan's got to move forward, right? And that's what the producer's, job is, to make sure everything moves forward. Like the idea that the show must go on, right? Doesn't matter if two people have broken legs. Show still's got to go on, right? And that's the way I want you to think about things. You have enough people on your team to have leads and backups of the leads and backups almost of the backups, right? That's how many people you have to make a 2D game, right? So that's like. So again, day-to-day roles, if you will, if in a real life situation for a producer, include things like interfacing with other team leads, right? And we can't really simulate that here so much, but you're going to be seeing that every time we get together in game production, you're going to see your other team members, and at least 3 other people should be team leads. They have some kind of major role, right? So thinking about your progress, what is your game looking like? Is your game actually progressing? Did you actually accomplish your plan? So you're going to come up with me with a plan today, right? You're going to say, Tom, next week we're going to work on, basic mechanics for the level. We're going to do this, or we're going to plan this. We're going to do a state machine that we're going to implement so we can have multiple screens in our level or in our game. You're going to produce something. Did you actually do what you said you're going to do? Right? That's the producer's role, to check to see if those things, is it a check mark? Is it a check or an X? Did you accomplish what you were supposed to do last week or this week, right? Those kind of things. Talking about gameplay, we're going to do some testing. There's got to be, that's another role, actually, and I want to put that out there to you guys as ideas, right? Another role is a lead tester, someone who's going to actually test the game out. A person who's going to do quality assurance, like actually look at the game and say, is it fun to play, right? Or is it crappy? Is it too fast, or is it too slow, or is it too easy, or is it too hard? That's all those things. Any of those twos is bad, right? Except when you play Dark Souls, it's meant to be really hard, right? If you play Dark Souls and it's too easy, you're playing the wrong game. You're not playing Dark Souls, right? Doesn't matter if you start off. If anyone not played Dark Souls before, it's a crazy game. You got to play Dark Souls. I know I'm saying maybe you don't like that kind of first-person kind of excitement,
What
but it.
are you talking about, first person?
I'm just saying.
No, all I want to say here is Dark Souls is a game you gotta learn. Like many games, it's just it got really popular for that. Everybody jumped onto it being the hardest game out there.
It is kind of the hardest game. It's harder than almost any game that I've played, and I've played lots of games in my life too, right? And I'm bringing it up not because I want to kill my discussion here about game production. I'm bringing it up because sometimes we look at games and we go, it's too hard, right? Well, it really depends on your goal, right? If you want to make it challenging, really ultra challenging for your player, that maybe you've achieved your goal, right? Dark Souls is a good example of a niche game, right? And I'll tell you why. Because most games aren't like Dark Souls. It's not like that. It's usually something like Fallout. Like let's look at Bethesda as a good example, right? Where there's a bit of a ramp, right? You can turn up your difficulty up and down. Can't really do that with Dark Souls except for which character you play. I'm talking about Dark Souls 3 now as an example, right? If you pick the Deprived, you're going to give yourself a bit of a challenge instead of picking the Knight character, right? So the idea here is there's got to be a bit of game balance, and your QA, your testers, have to make sure that everything is in balance, right? I also want to talk about this. Some people are all for realism, right? And I love realism in games. I love it. You want to try and be as realistic as possible, even in the 2D environment. Well, we want to try and get some realism going. But even when we do prototypes, anyone ever make their own game, like tabletop game, a board game, or anything like that? If you're a geeky guy like me, I made my own kind of role-playing game, right? When we started playing Dungeons and Dragons back in the 70s, and then as Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games progressed on the tabletop, they were so popular they got tried to translate in video games. Like I don't know, I'll talk about Morrowind as a good example of where we try to translate a role-playing game into something that's in a video game, right? Most designers, for whatever reason in the beginning, they want to try and make it as realistic as possible, right? What's the challenge when it comes to realism? What's the big problem? Sometimes not fun. What else? Well, I mean, I'm going to go back to Dark Souls for a second, right? And someone was saying, sorry, I can't remember his name again. In the corner. Hi.
Yes.
I'm sorry, your name again?
My name is Rick, but now everybody's going to know it.
Because you're on YouTube, right? So you're saying, you love Dark Souls. It's a good thing, right? You're thinking it's a good thing that it's like that, right?
I think the main thing is that when you're designing a game,
Yeah.
you have to have a particular idea of what you're going in.
I like it.
As you progress in the development, early on at least, because you can't be changing things all the time.
Yeah.
At the end, you still have to take time for bug fix. But you have to make sure that you adjust it so you can get a better idea of what works.
Okay,
what
so
you're trying to go for.
so the answer is you have to know what you want.
The deal is that it's
Yeah.
supposed to have like a barrier to entry that you're supposed to overcome by understanding the mechanics.
Okay.
For a lot of games, you can get away with not knowing a lot until it starts getting a little too hard.
Awesome. So nice answer, nice long answer. Yeah, so we're saying is you need to know, I'm just going to translate so people can hear, hear it on YouTube here when you kind of watch this thing. You know what, you kind of want to strive for something that you want in your game from a design perspective. And sometimes in Dark Souls, there's a bit of a block, and they do that on purpose so that way you can get into the game and understand that there's a difficulty because it's planned that way, right? But what about the difficulty between making it too realistic? Is there a problem with that? What's the problem?
Dark Souls is not very realistic.
No, but what's the problem with making it ultra realistic besides being too hard?
Well, a game like DayZ, for example, or Arma, is supposed to be an ultra realistic simulation of
Right.
arming in real life, and you end up walking 10 kilometers, it can take you 45 minutes.
Walking
That's not
10
fun.
kilometers, right? You can't
The realistic scale can be too much, and
Right.
it takes away from the experience of having fun.
you can't transport like we do in Fallout or Oblivion or Skyrim or one of those kind of. I'm just looking at a Bethesda for as an example, right? Where you can kind of teleport to the next location, kind of travel, right? It's not like that. And why do they bring those things in there? Why do they break realism? You think with something like that? Because it's not fun to walk. It's not a walking game. We're gonna walk, for miles in real life, right? It's gonna take you 15 minutes in the game, 15 minutes in real life. That's crazy, right? For the most part, unless we're playing a VR game, well, maybe you want to walk, right? I don't know, but so that's a problem. So it might be unfun. What's the other problem with realism from a production perspective? Now, I want to produce as much of a realistic game as possible. Too much time to make, right? Because you're going to try, and no one, by the way, can produce a 100% realistic game these days. It's all tricks still when we produce games today, right? Because there's some issues. There's mechanical issues with the game, how to make a game more realistic, and all that kind of stuff.
And sometimes even the drive to bring something into a more realistic way, or even just a more photorealistic way of presentation of the game, necessary stress on the mechanics itself, or even how the game is actually presented.
Right. So the drive to go for realism can really stress out the mechanics. But I think the main one for me is, and I want you to always think about this. If you can take anything away from today's discussion, it's this: you have to find a balance between realism and playability. All right. That's the balance, and that's a careful balance, my friends. Right. That means lots of testing, lots and lots of testing to see if the game is fun or unfun. Does it work? Does it break? Those kind of things. And that takes a QA person, QA lead, right? And I recommend that. In this scenario, we have so many people, kind of part of your teams. Make someone the QA lead or tester, right? And that's all they do. Their word is, if it's unfun, right? It's not fun, right? If they don't like it, it's kind of one person of the target audience. The other thing to do is, if you really want to, that QA person can also go to other teams and say, hey, check out our game. What do you think, right? Because I think getting information from as many people as possible and widening your, kind of your beta testers, the number of beta testers you have, could give you some really good information. But don't just listen for things like, oh, it's good. So that doesn't tell you anything, right? Give them some kind of rating scale. Get them to do a little survey at the end. If they play your game, sit there and go, okay, so how was the playability? Was it, from a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 5, whatever. Give them some kind of numbers, and it's got to be measurable. When you do some kind of, think about giving a rating to a game, just like you do a review. Anyone do a game review before in their life? Some people may have, right? It's that kind of stuff. Take a look at some key performance indicators, KPIs for that game. How does it stack up? Is it too hard? Is it too, how's the difficulty? Is it right? From a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 is perfect and 1 sucks, it's too easy or it's too hard. That kind of stuff. Come up with that.
Yeah.
Take a look at the user interface. Is it good? Is the experience, the aesthetics of the game, does it match your expectations when you started off? You have an awesome screen and then gameplay really sucks, right? Is there any transitions? What's the tutorialization like in your game? Is there a tutorial? Like, do you know how to play the game from the get-go, or do you just randomly hit keys? Like, what is it like? There's so many aspects you can ask somebody to kind of do. Don't make it too long, because beta testers won't want to play your game if you've got a big list of things to answer, right? It's got to be quick and dirty, and it's got to be something like, okay, so my game, they're rating it like, 2 out of 5 because of these problems, right? Get that QA person to take all that and take it back to the team. When you guys have a weekly checkpoint, we can say, we have our current build, and our current build kind of sucks, guys, and these are the problems. So you can address those problems if you're engineers, right? Or your designers, if you maybe take it back to the drawing board, didn't work, right? So the producers is kind of involved with those kind of activities, working with QA, talking about management. Now, who the manager is in this course, right? Me, right? I'm the manager. I own you guys. Imagine you guys are working for me as my big gaming company. I'm the, the upper management, right? And you got to come to me. The technical leads aren't going to talk to me directly, maybe. It should be the team lead, if you think about it in real life. Now, here in the classroom, we're all going to talk to each other, right? And actually, a good management does that. They go into the kind of, into the trenches and they talk to the team, right? Which is what I'm going to try and do. So all these kind of things. And it's not just about, actually producing the game, but other weird things like paperwork, right? Like we have to do in real life. And I'm going to get you to do paperwork in real life. There's going to be our ongoing, game design document. It's not going to end. That game design document you produced it's not over. You're going to continue to produce it for me, and update it, until the end, where you have a completed game design document with all the details, right? Who's ever talked about blueprinting? Ever hear about blueprinting for your game? Yeah, you've heard about what's blueprinting?
It's like where you design something on paper, and you're kind of like using it again and again, basically, like something you can use as a template almost.
You can use it. So that's one aspect of blueprinting. What about this? What about blueprinting your entire game in terms of story beat? Right? So think about, you have a spreadsheet, and I can produce a blueprint document for you guys at some point in this course as well. We sit there and go, okay, well, here's where I start. This is where the player is going to see. That's story beat number one. Then they're going to enter after the menu scene, they're going to start gameplay. They're going to do this. They're going to get tutorialized, right? Then in the first level, this is what the goal of the first level is, and give some screenshots and stuff like that. And it's all in almost like a spreadsheet format where you have columns.
Sort of like storyboarding, you mean the same idea?
It's kind of like that, but almost like just purely with Excel, right? And in Excel, what you can do is you can talk about rising and falling action, like that kind of stuff as well, where you can sit there and go, you start off as, it's kind of, there's some really excitement here. Like, example, if, when you start off in the game and the character starts off in jail, or, you're kind of thrown into the action, and that actually is part of your tutorial. A lot of games do that nowadays, right? Where you kind of learn what to do, almost like, learn to walk before you can fire a gun. So all those kind of aspects, are part of your game design documents or documentation, right? Also, other things that you might want to think about is marketing, right? As another role. I know we haven't really talked about marketing. You probably won't talk about it probably until later on in this course and in this program, right? In the program itself. But think about coming up with a sell sheet, right? What is your game going to look like, right? Coming up with a sell sheet might be a really good idea because it kind of solidifies in your mind what you're really producing at the end of the day, right? Some of you are going to work for larger studios, but in Toronto, most people in most of the studios in Toronto are little smaller studios, right? And because of that, we want to kind of think about things like some of you may just start your own, right? You might start your own little game studio, right? Some of you may not do games at all. Maybe you're going to do something more like simulations, especially for medical aspects and those kind of things. You might do games, but not for making games, but for serious games, for training exercises and those kind of things, especially as we get into VR, AR, and MR, right? As we go towards the future, right? So for the producer's role, I'm going to skip forward a little bit. So let's talk about the design production cycle. Again, things to think about is, what do? They do things like implementing gameplay into the build, right? Tweaking existing gameplay features. So they're going to look at those things and sit there and go, it's not quite right. And they're going to take that back to the engineers and say, not necessarily play testing, but looking at those game features that they wanted to add in and kind of saying, yeah, let's add this aspect to the game feature, which means you may need to have a change request happen, right? Providing feedback to artists and engineers is a good one, which is like saying things like, you know what, I don't think this asset is right, or I don't think the functionality is really what I asked for. This is what I asked for as a designer, and this is what you're giving me as an engineer. It doesn't quite match, right? Some of us, we call that in the real world unit testing. We do a lot of unit testing. We look at each individual function, a feature, method, if you will, right, as a unit of work. And does that unit of work match the requirements? And if it does, fantastic, check mark. If it doesn't, go back to the drawing board. It's not done, right? It's not done to spec. All right. Other things that they do that they're involved with, especially from a lead designer perspective, is things like, how all the controls work. That's what design are all about. Scoring. Some of you may not have, who does not have scoring in their game, right? Is that a requirement? Were you told to score in your game, right? Not all games these days have score, right? I'm going to look at Dark Souls as an example. Let's go back to Dark Souls. Does Dark Souls have a score, right? People play, not really, right? You collect souls, And then your experience are kind of like a score, but not really. It just helps you get up a level, right? So whereas, and you know, especially in a role-playing game environment, it's not exactly about score. If you're playing a retro game though, like, I don't know, Space Invaders, right? Or something really retro like that, right? Then it's about score because that's what we had back then. Remember back then when we in the arcades, before everything went to consoles and PCs, right? It was all about taking your money, right? Put a quarter into the machine, you can continue playing. Or if you
The idea of a score was essentially so you'd be able to have something to attain.
Right.
You're playing through it and you want to play more because you have this goal.
You have a goal.
This top score that you want to beat.
But the
And
goal
you have
is
something that you can beat with friends or something.
right.
It's
But
an interesting way of being able to get people to play video games at arcades all the time.
and that was back then. Back then it was kind of. But nowadays we don't have as much of that. We have other things. We have achievements, right? We have those kind of things in games. We have other things to kind of show off how you do. But for the most part, do achievements really work? Do you actually go on Xbox Live or on your PlayStation Network and go, "Oh man, my buddy John, man, he's really awesome. He's better than me." Do you do that? Some people don't. Sometimes you do. Like
some people want that 100%.
some people want the 100%. Or what if you play a game like Overwatch, right? You want to have that level 100 or whatever it's going to be, right? But for the most part, right? I mean, achievements are, some of them don't work, right? And we got to think about that. Sometimes achievements aren't the right solution. And the same thing goes with scoring. So scoring may not fit within your game,
The
right?
thing about achievements is that a lot of times they're usually used as sort of like just as a milestone system for just little stuff and ways of being able to just kind of push you to do stupid stuff to get like everything done in the game to push the game time. The best achievements I find are the ones that actively help out in increasing, like giving you access to new stuff.
I like that. So again, just to reiterate here on YouTube, and again, I agree with that. I think achievements are there to push you forward, to try and challenge you, if you will, to get to kind of hit all the check marks for the game, do all the side quests, all those kind of things. That's part of what it is. But again, you may not, in this 2D environment, we may not have a call for scoring, or you may. And if you do, you have to balance that too, right? In your mechanic, you can't give 100 points just because. There's got to be a reason why you're getting 100 points from killing the enemy, right? If you're going to give points at all. Let's talk about deliverables a little bit. Everyone knows what deliverables are, yeah? Right? Deliverables are things that you have to pump out, right, on a weekly basis, pretty much, right? And the art department has deliverables. We're talking about the art production cycle really quickly, right? Things like, you know, what is it going to look like? Mostly it's asset creation or asset acquisition. Let me do that for here in this college, right? In this program. No one's really going to do asset creation for the most part here in this program. Yeah? Anybody going to do asset creation? It's a good exercise. If you want to try and do asset creation, if you know how, fantastic. It makes your game that much more unique, right? If you can get it done, right? But it's not required, right? And I think it's good to learn the asset creation tool sets that are out there, especially the ones that are open source and free. I think those are good things. For the most part, the art person is going to be involved with getting assets, testing whether they're good, right? Whether they fit within the game, like I said earlier, making sure the sound assets are there as well. And actually, I mean, for me, what I want you to do is test them out inside of a little, you know, sandbox. Test them out, like actually do some coding and test out the asset and make sure it works. And then give that code completed, this feature set, over to your lead engineer and say, look, I've tested it out. The asset works well. I think it's in balance. I think it's going to do for our game, right? The other thing is tracking asset creation. Sometimes you want to put it, you know, the asset, the art person wants to kind of put together a list of assets that they have to get or create. And then are they done? Did you get all that stuff, right? Because sometimes you miss things. Like, and I'm talking everything from buttons on the user interface to little hearts that signify your health, to whatever else that you're going to do in the game. Anything that you pick up, a pickup, you know, things like a sound effect, like I mentioned earlier, any of those things, those are all part in this game, in this environment of art production, right? So how do you do that? But you have to track stuff, and a lot of that, and what I like to do when I'm doing that kind of stuff, if I'm involved with that, is some kind of tracking sheet. And prototyping. Sometimes what we want to do is what I was talking about with sandboxing is like prototyping. You want to prototype your art, make sure that it works, and if it does, pass it on, right? And make sure that it meets spec. I'm not going to talk about this too much more in terms of commercial software packages because for the most part, you guys aren't in the creation game. Engineering, right? For the most part, who's using some kind of framework? I've introduced, last week I introduced Create.js and JavaScript, right? I know that you're still using P5? No, you're going to get away from that, right? Is anyone else using some kind of framework? Or yeah, what are you using?
Made a prototype on Phaser, and now we're trying to make a prototype on Crazy.
Phaser. What's the difference between a framework and an API? Right? Someone put it up. Yes.
API is like an actual application that you can go in and kind of move stuff around. So like,
Okay. Maybe. Yeah. What else? Anyone else have an answer for that?
I think you build something on a framework and then you can like, plug in an API.
Plug in. I like the plug-in idea, right? Is that what you're going to say?
API is like a library.
Library, right? OpenGL is a good example of an API, right? Application programming interface, right? And whereas a framework might be something like, Phaser, right? And the reason I'm saying Phaser is more like a framework than an API is because it's more opinionated. The more opinionated something is, where you need to use these 10 parts for things to work, right? And if you kind of go outside that, it just doesn't work. You need to use you need to hang your game almost like on a framework. That becomes a framework to me. A good example of that is a game engine is what we're talking about. When you talk about Unity, that's a game engine. It's a framework, and it also has API aspects, but you need to do certain things in Unity a certain way. Same thing with Unreal, same thing with other big game engines out there. But an API is the stuff that I'm asking you to use. I'm asking you to use Create.js, right? And maybe later on in here at George Brown College, you're going to be something like with 3D games with the web. I don't know if that's going to happen at some point. Anyone want to make a 3D game this semester with the web? You can do that, right? But then you can't use Create.js. You're going to use
Specifically
2D game, right? Yeah, you'd have to use 3JS and then WebGL, right? But the idea is that every one of those things that you're doing, I mean, a lot of times we do things from scratch, especially when you make a AAA game. You do it with C++. You start off with low-level OpenGL calls, and you build out your own game engine a lot of times. That's just the way we do it, right? Oftentimes, though, if you're a small game studio, right, and you can't afford the time to put into making your own game engine, you build something with an API, right, like OpenGL, or with some kind of a big framework like, or game engine like Unity or Unreal. Okay, so when we talk about middleware, I always think about things like, are you going to use another game engine to make your game? And a small company sometimes can't afford to make their game engine from scratch, or don't have the know-how a lot of times because they're just starting off, but they want to make a game, right? And they want to make it quick, rapid game production, right? And you want to do that with Unity. Unity is probably the easiest game engine to learn and to produce something with, right? And Unreal would be the next step. It's a little bit more challenging only because the back-end language is C++, although you can do a lot of things with blueprinting. Okay, so engineers do that. They kind of work their design, and they take the art and they create their the actual end product with either middleware or from scratch or whatever they're going to use. And they also do things like fix problems, because you're going to find bugs in your build, right? They're going to create the first build. They're the people that are going to work with GitHub the most, okay? And they're going to be doing things like different branches. We're going to talk about different branches this semester with GitHub. And what's, in GitHub, if we talked about GitHub last week, remember, what's the difference between Git and GitHub? Git and GitHub. Last week we couldn't talk about this. Anyone know? Git's the local version, yeah? And GitHub is the cloud service, right? It's only one cloud service. There's also Bitbucket, right, as well as an alternative. We can store our files online and share it. Collaboration, right? So what are the three things I asked you about this last week? What are the three main reasons why we use GitHub? Backup, collaboration, and source control, right? Revision control. Man, I don't know what happened, but it didn't work. It doesn't work now. It used to work, but it doesn't work now. Let's step back and see what changed. Revision control, right? All right, so that's what engineers are involved with. Now, working together, I love this slide. And we're going to take a break from the PowerPoints. Maybe I'll add a little bit more of the second part of the PowerPoint later on. But working together is the biggest, difficulty when we get together as teams, right? I've heard this message a lot of times lately, which is, life would be just grand if I didn't have any coworkers, right? Life would be fantastic if I didn't have any customers, right? And unfortunately, that's not how life is. We deal with people all the time, right? Whether it's remote working or, kind of working with other people, right? Sometimes, actually, most oftentimes in the real world, at least in my experience, right? You don't always get people that you want to work with. right? You might get somebody that's been thrust upon you, you're working with him, right? And he's the new hire or whatever. You're going to train him. You're going to work with him. They might say it in a nice way. They might say, you know what, John, you're going to train Corey today, right? He's our new hire, right? And you're going to be training him, right? I want you to sit with him and show him the ropes because he's going to be our new engineering person, right? And you're going to start off from something. You're going to say to yourself sometimes, man, I got all this work to do, and I got to train somebody too, right? I don't even like Corey, maybe. I don't know. Maybe Corey's not my kind of guy. He doesn't, he doesn't go drinking after, I don't know, these kind of things, or whatever kind of social things he doesn't do. I don't, or maybe I really like Corey, and you know what? I can't focus on my work anymore because they put a person in my team that's exactly like me. I want to go party with the guy. I want to play Dungeons and Dragons with the guy. I want to play Dark Souls with the guy. I want to do Overwatch with the guy. I want to do whatever, right? I don't want to do any work, right? But I want to do something else. And sometimes you get that, good and bad things happening, where you have to work with somebody. The biggest problem is we complain about each other, and that sucks, right? And I'm going to tell you here in this course, when we're together from Game Production 2, I don't want to hear complaints about your team. Okay, and not because I don't want to hear problems like from a work perspective, right? But that's dirty laundry, guys, right? I'll tell you right now, for the most part, the Judas, right, in the team is the first person that's going to come to the manager and say, I have a problem, right? My team doesn't work well, right? And chances are, if you're ever a manager, I want you to hear me when I tell you this. That's the person that doesn't work in the team, right? The first person that complains to you about things happening, not happening in the team is the main person that's the problem in the entire team. He's going to wreck the synergy, right, of that team. If ever you're a new manager, listen to my words, right? Because it's happened to me 99 out of 100 times. Every time I join a new team, some Judas is going to come to me and say, man, and if you know people who don't know, I'm sorry, I apologize for the biblical reference, but it's because that's how they're like. They're going to come after you and they're going to talk to you about it. And they're going to say, hey, man, it's this person, the other person, that person. They're just not, they're not good to work with, and they're not good people. And and then that person doesn't produce a darn thing, right? That's what they do. They just complain all the time, right? I don't want to hear complaints. That stuff is your dirty laundry within your team. Keep it in, right? It's like a bad smell, right? Keep that bad smell into your team. I don't want to know about it, right? At the end of the day, when you do your production, when you actually go and present, remember what I told you last week? Your game is the #1 game. There's no better game out there. Your game doesn't suck. Your game's not incomplete. You're just producing another build. That's what you're showing, right? And you're positive all the time, right? I know it's hard to pretend, but no manager is going to want to see somebody who's going to complain to them. Well, it's not really that great working with these people, right? Okay, so working together is the biggest problem. Try and keep it, keep it positive. But the main thing for a producer is to focus on the common goal. What are we building? Focus on the work. Focus on what you're producing that week. That's the most important thing. If you don't focus on what you're producing that week, you're going to digress into other conversations, things that aren't working. How come, I'm just going to put it out there again, how come Corey didn't produce that week? How come he didn't give me the asset? He's the artist, and you know what? He just didn't create that asset. He was supposed to. He promised me, but he didn't, right? Tom, Corey's not producing. Get Corey to produce, right? And how do we do that? How do we get people to produce and do stuff in our team?
Electricity.
Electricity is not going to do it. Shooting him is not going to do it. Stabbing him is not going to do it. It's not going to make him produce. Firing him is not going to do it. Because you know what? Most people in this kind of environment are unionized, right? Or something to do with that. They're very tight, right? And especially in the game world, right? So the idea is to keep conversation open, be honest as much as possible. I know it's hard. Talk to the person and say, you're just not producing. Say those words, right? Have that meeting with yourself and sit down and go, you didn't produce. And you say that, the biggest role of the producer is going to go to the person and saying, are you having difficulty? Can I help you? Can I add another resource to what you're doing? Because you're just not producing. Make it out there, right? It's got to be done sometimes. And you got to be honest, right? Any other questions? I'm going to pause the PowerPoint for today as much as possible. I didn't quite get done what I wanted to do, but I'd rather talk about these things, especially as we start off, right? And talk about things right. All right, so we're going to take a 10-minute break, right? And you're going to go have a smoke and talk to your grandmother or, whatever. Go to the washroom, right? And then when you come back, we're going to start off with this team building thing, right? I'm going to put up Lab 2 requirements, which are I want to know what you're doing. What's your plan for the next 12 weeks? That's what you have to deliver. And I want 2 submissions per team. Any questions before we stop? Yes.
Do you subscribe to the idea that it's best to try to lock down like a sort of like a overall vision or like a design document for the game as early as possible to make sure that all the features and stuff will be well done?
The question is, do I subscribe to the idea that you should lock down your concept and your idea for the game as early as possible? And the answer is yes. That's my answer.
Concept and idea. You want to make sure that you get
As much as you can, but remember, there's going to be some changes in the way. Any other questions? Any other questions? Lab 2 is going to be due at the end of the day, okay? All right, so take a 10-minute break. When we come back, we're going to go right into Lab 2 and team building, okay?